The next Wyrmwood design project is going to be a chessboard, because Bobby had a dream that we could build a chessboard, and so we're gonna. We decided that if Wyrmwood is gonna do a chessboard, we want it to be unlike any other. So this chessboard is gonna have the functionality of not only playing horizontal on a table with traditional chess pieces, but also hanging on a wall. You can play vertically with a set of magnetic chess pieces that we designed to go along with the board. So in typical Wyrmwood fashion, when designing a new product, we're going to offer a standard line of chessboards in various materials, but we also wanted to offer some extras that were really kicked up a notch. So what we needed was a theme. So Doug and I had a conversation, and he wanted to go with a fantasy theme, elves and dwarves.
Dwarvish. Dwarf-ish? It's not dwarf-ish, it's dwarf.
So one of the high-end boards we're offering is designed with an elven theme, and the other with a dwarven theme, with sort of matching the woods and kind of iconography to go with each of those. All right, to break down how the boards are built, they have an MDF core with a checkered veneer on top, a solid wood border around the outside, and finally some metal and wood inlays. We start with the checkered veneer. Veneer is very thin sheets of wood. Running the fragile veneer through the table saw on the sled gives me the opportunity to use a backer board on top to hold all the fibers together and make sure they don't break. The original strips are ripped at 2 1/4 inches. There's a range of sizes for tournament legal, and 2 1/4 sits right in the middle of that. We decided to go with veneer for the construction of the board because it opens up an opportunity to use a lot of different materials you can't always get in solid wood. Once I have all the strips cut out, I'll take them to the bench and start laying out the strips in an alternating pattern. Taking 2 different contrasting veneer strips, I start taping them up. I use painter's tape on one side to hold them together. I then flip the whole board over and tape the entire seam using veneer tape, which is a water-activated cellulose tape, which holds the entire seam and all the fibers together. I prefer to use this than the painter's tape because it doesn't leave a sticky residue after it's pressed. When it dries, it's like hard, and you can actually sand it off, where the painter's tape leaves like goo behind. Once the first series of alternating strips is taped up, I take them back to the table saw and use exactly the same process. Run them through the saw again to get strips, which are now alternating squares. Once I have my series of strips that are alternating squares, it's back to the bench. Every other checkered square needs to be rotated to actually get the checkered pattern. When taping up the alternating squares, it's important that the intersections of the squares here line up perfectly, because it'll be very obvious if they don't. Now that the checkerboard patterns are taped up with veneer tape, it's time to get ready to press them. When you press veneer panels, you always have to do both sides to balance it, so that when the glue dries on one side, the panel won't warp. So I'm gonna pull some sheets of onagray and cut out some squares for the other side. So a track saw is actually just a skill saw, but it has a groove in the base plate which fits into a track, so you make sure that when you're using it, you can cut a perfectly straight line. You may notice that I'm using the skill saw backwards. Again, it's because veneer is so fragile. When you run the saw frontwards, it cuts up and chips the pieces out. When you run it backwards, it's cutting down and gives you a clean cut. We have our checkered faces and our backers, so off to the veneer press. I enlisted the help of Hunter because this is a time-sensitive procedure. I want to get all the boards loaded in the press at once, and it's a bit of a race against time once we put the veneer onto the glue. It's a water-based glue, so as soon as you lay the wood on it, it starts to absorb the moisture and then the wood will swell, it will twist, it will move. So we're taping the backer in place and flipping it over so there's some weight to hold it down. Hunter's gonna help me lay the checkerboards on the front and tape them in place, which will give us enough time to slide them into the veneer press and get some pressure applied. So the veneer press is a large hydraulic press. The bottom table is pressed up against the top, and the plates are machine ground aluminum with fluid channels through them. So the machine pumps heated fluid through the plates to raise the temperature of the glue to the curing point. So using the press, we cut down a 2 to 3 hour cure time to just 30 minutes, and we can keep right on working. The boards get a quick look over to make sure everything glued down properly. It's good. So now it's time to take the veneer tape off the outside. After rehydrating the adhesive tape and letting it sit for a few minutes, it's easily removed with a chisel, and any amount that remains, we just quickly sand it off. So the checkerboards have been glued down onto oversized MDF pieces, just to make them easier to handle. They now have to be broken down into individual boards. At the radial saw, I'm gonna roughly break these down. I'm not yet concerned in the accuracy of the square. We're gonna take care of that at the table saw. So I have to establish one straight edge, which is parallel to the veneer squares. So there's some shimming and adjustment needed here to make sure it's perfectly in line. Once that's accomplished, I can use the fence on the table saw to cut it to perfect final size, which in this case is 18 inches. Once the boards are all squared up, we're going to put magnet holes in the back of the board. These large magnets installed in the back of the board are what will hold our magnetic pieces onto the front when it's hung on the wall. Magnetism. This small prototyping CNC doesn't have a lot of fixturing, so we just use double-sided tape to hold it in place as it is machined. When it goes into production, we'll probably use the larger machines. Since this one's so small, we can only do half the board at a time. So we're gonna run half the holes, turn the board around, and run half the holes on the other side. So that completes the MDF core. With the checkered front, now it's onto the solid wood border. So the wooden frame starts with solid lumber. Paul's pulling the materials based on the list that we gave him, and he's breaking them down into blanks. The wooden frame that goes around the chessboard is a lot like a picture frame. It's framing around the outside, but it's not square. It's actually a fairly complicated shape. So in order to make this complicated profile, it has to get cut 6 different times. And that's where this machine comes in. So this is a molder. This particular machine has 6 different cutter heads in it. Each of those cutter heads can be loaded with a different profile knife. So each of the heads on the molder can be adjusted independently. The tables, the shoes, the fences, there's a lot of adjustments to make sure it comes through just right. So as it passes through the machine, it's gonna get cut top, bottom, and both sides with different profiles. So in one pass, you can get a very complicated shape. So the frame around the outside of the chessboard is actually 2 frames. There's a small inner one, which I'm going to fabricate first. To avoid running very small pieces through the router table, I'm going to run a rabbet on both edges of a larger piece of wood. I'll then take that larger piece to the table saw and rip it down to its final dimension. Once the small inner frame is fabricated, it's time to attach it to the board. I cut 45 degrees on each corner and then glue and pin it to the side of the board. Once that border is installed, we move on to the large outer frame. I start by cutting the 45 degrees for the miters and fit them to the boards. But before installing them and gluing them to the board, send the parts off to Bennett and the laser department. I don't even know how lasers work. Lasers are like magic. You know they're cone-shaped, like lasers aren't straight? It's actually like hourglass shaped, which is why you need to focus it at like a point. It like comes to a point and then goes back out. Like it's not straight up and down. You know, you cut out like a circle. If it's a 1/4 inch thick, it's tapered in or out. Like it's not straight up and down. And depending where you like focus that, it can actually like move around, which is all interesting. I don't know how it works. Putting the blue tape over the piece of wood as we cut it out serves a couple functions. For one, it reduces the char, which you can see building up on the outside. And particularly on open grain woods like wenge, when you're doing the powder fills, it keeps it out of the pores where you don't want to glue it in. Once the fit for the wooden inlay is checked, it's just a matter of gluing it in place. In this case, Bennett is using CA glue, or cyanoacrylate, if you like big words. Basically super glue. And it gives him time to get it positioned properly, and then spraying the activator on top will cure the glue instantly. Once he's done gluing in the wooden pieces, he moves on to the powder fills. The recess that we made is just filled with a powder, in this case brass, and then the CA glue soaks all the way through the material, and again the hardener cures it instantly. The blue tape underneath everything is protecting the surface of the wenge, mostly from the pores getting contaminated by the metal dust. Once most of the excess is removed, the tape's peeled off and it's sanded to a finished surface. Sanding, 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 sanding. Ta-da! With all the inlays complete and the frames cut to the finished size, it's just a matter of the final glue up and assembly of the board. Pinning the border on is just to hold it in place. All the strength of the board actually comes from the glue bond. To glue these boards together, we're going to use packing tape and plastic wrap. It's actually a very good clamp. We put a layer of plastic wrap to protect the board from the sticky adhesive of the packing tape, and then over that plastic wrap, just a few loops of tape and stretching it gives adequate clamping pressure for the glue to cure. So the wood choices for the boards are purely aesthetic. So for the dwarven board, we used quarter sawn oak and wenge, which was sort of a dark, strong color palette that we wanted to go with. And then the design elements reflect sort of dwarven runes. For the elven board, we went with rosewood as the main outer frame. And for the light squares, we went with a lightly figured maple. The design elements at the corners are a much more organic floral design. So now that the board is finished, all that's left are the finishing touches. Magnets need to be installed into all the holes in the back, and then a sheet of cork laid over it to keep them all in place. The French cleats we install on the back are for two purposes. One, to hang on the wall, and the other is it makes a nice set of feet elevating your board off the table. And each board on the back is individually numbered. It wasn't my idea. Why did we do that? Bobby, why do we individually number all the chessboards?
Because Doug thought it was cool.
And so we did it. I think the design was very strong. My personal favorite is the dwarf. I think Bennett did an excellent job executing the inlays. And I think overall, this is just a terrific chessboard. They're also live on Kickstarter right now. Elven and Dwarven ones I think are exclusive just to the Kickstarter, but we always sell chessboards on our website. If you like the chessboards, but you have a different vision or some materials that are important to you, we have a custom shop and we're open to all kinds of inquiries. So the sky's the limit. Get it!